Chapter 1 of The Keep, a shorter version. The castle was falling apart, but at 2 a.m., under a useless moon, Danny couldn't see this. What he saw looked solid as hell, 2 round towers with an arch between them, and across that arch was an iron gate that looked like it hadn't moved in 300 years or maybe ever. He'd never been to a castle before, or even this part of the world, but something about it all was familiar to Danny. He seemed to remember the place from a long time ago, not like he'd been here exactly, but from a dream or a book. The towers had those square indentations around the top that little kids put on castles when they draw them. The air was cold with a smoky bite, like fall had already come, even though it was mid-August and people in New York were barely dressed. The trees were losing their leaves. Danny felt them landing in his hair and heard them crunching under his boots when he walked. He was looking for a doorbell, a knocker, a light, some way into this place, or at least a way to find the way in. He was getting pessimistic. Danny had waited 2 hours in a gloomy little valley town for a bus to this castle that never frigging came before he looked up and saw its black shape against the sky. Then he'd started to walk, hauling his Samsonite and satellite dish a couple of miles up this hill, the Samsonite's puny wheels catching on boulders and tree roots and rabbit holes. His limp didn't help. The whole trip had been like that, one hassle after another, starting with the red eye from Kennedy that got towed into a field after a bomb threat, surrounded by trucks with blinky red lights that were comforting up until you realized their job was to make sure the fireball only incinerated those poor suckers who were already on the plane. So Danny had missed his connection to Prague and the train to wherever the hell he was now, some German-sounding town that didn't seem to be in Germany or anywhere else. Danny couldn't even find it online, although he hadn't been sure about the spelling. Talking on the phone to his cousin Howie, who owned this castle and had paid Danny's way to help out with the renovation, he tried to nail down some details. Danny, I'm still trying to get this straight. Is your hotel in Austria, Germany, or the Czech Republic? Howie, tell you the truth, I'm not even clear on that myself. Those borders are constantly sliding around. Danny, thinking, they are? Howie, but remember, it's not a hotel yet. Right now it's just an old... The line went dead. When Danny tried calling back, he couldn't get through. But his tickets came the next week, blurry postmark. Plane, train, bus, and seeing how he was newly unemployed and had to get out of New York fast because of a misunderstanding at the restaurant where he worked, getting paid to go somewhere else, anywhere else, even the fucking moon, was not a thing Danny could say no to. He was 15 hours late. He left his Samsonite and satellite dish by the gate and circled the left tower. A wall curved away from the tower into the trees, and Danny followed that wall until woods closed in around him. He was moving blind. He heard flapping and scuttling, and as he walked, the trees got closer and closer to the wall until finally he was squeezing in between them, afraid if he lost contact with the wall, he'd get lost. And then a good thing happened. The trees pushed right through the wall and split it open and gave Danny a way to climb inside. This wasn't easy. The wall was 20 feet high, jagged and crumbly, with tree trunks crushed into the middle, and Danny had a tricky knee from an injury connected to the misunderstanding at work. Plus, his boots were not exactly made for climbing. They were city boots, hipster boots, somewhere between square-tipped and pointy. His lucky boots, or so Danny had thought a long time ago when he bought them. They needed resoling. The boots were skiddy, even on flat city concrete, so the sight of Danny clawing and scrambling his way up 20 feet of broken wall was not a thing he would have wanted broadcast. But finally he made it, panting, sweating, dragging his sore leg, and hoisted himself onto a flat walkway-type thing that ran on top of the wall. He brushed off his pants and stood up. It was one of those views that make you feel like God for a second. The The castle walls looked silver under the moon, stretched out over the hill in a wobbly oval the size of a football field. There were round towers every 50 yards or so. Below Danny, inside the walls, it was black, pure, like a lake or outer space. He felt the curve of big sky over his head, full of purplish, torn-up clouds. The castle itself was back where Danny had started out, a clump of buildings and towers jumbled together, but the tallest tower stood off on its own, narrow and square, with a red light shining in a window near the top. Danny was nervous about seeing his cousin after so long. The Howie he knew as a kid you couldn't picture grown up. He'd been wrapped in that pear-shaped girl fat you see on certain boys. At age 7 or 8, Danny and Howie invented a game they'd play whenever they saw each other at holidays and family picnics. Terminal Zeus, it was called. And there was a hero, Zeus. And there were monsters and missions and runways and airlifts and bad guys and fireballs and high-speed chases. They could play anywhere from a garage to an old canoe to underneath a dining room table, using whatever they found: straws, feathers, paper plates, candy wrappers. Howie thought most of it up. Sometimes he made Danny do the talking. Okay, you tell it. What does the underwater torture dungeon look like? And Danny would start making stuff up: rocks, seaweed, baskets of human eyeballs. He got so deep inside the game he forgot who he was. And when his folks said time to go home, the shock of being yanked away made Danny throw himself on the ground in front of them, begging for another half hour, please, another 20 minutes, 10, 5, please, just one more minute, please, please, please. Frantic not to be ripped away from the world he and Howie had made. The other cousins thought Howie was weird, a loser, plus he was adopted, and they kept their distance. Rafe especially, not the oldest cousin, but the one they all listened to. "You're so sweet to play with Howie," Danny's mom would say. "From what I understand, he doesn't have many friends." But Danny wasn't trying to be nice. He cared what his other cousins thought, but nothing could match the fun of Terminal Zeus. When they were teenagers, Howie changed. Overnight was what everyone said. He had a traumatic experience, and his sweetness drained away, and he turned moody, anxious, always wiggling a foot and muttering at King Crimson lyrics under his breath. But no one had ever paid much attention to Howie, and after the change, the traumatic incident, Danny pretended not to.